This is MRN Out Loud, brought to you by Hercules Tires.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of MRN Out Loud. No NASCAR racing this week, at least on the national level. There is, however, a lot of local short track action that you should take advantage of if you're a racing fan and needing to get that fixed. However, there's also a lot of horse racing going on at local tracks right now that's outside the realm of the Triple Crown or the biggest horse races we hear about every year. Kurt Becker is going to join us on this program. Not only is he one of the announcers at the Motor Racing Network, but he's one of the finest horse racing announcers in the country as well. And we're going to talk about the way NASCAR and horse racing have some parallels in terms of how horses and jockeys move up through the ranks and how their business is conducted. We'll do that next on this week's edition of MRN Out Loud.
Citywide to countryside, whatever you drive, wherever you go, Hercules has the value, selection, and industry-leading warranty to get you there no matter where the road takes you. Go to HerculesTires.com. There you can find the nearest authorized Hercules retail location to you. Plus, you can use the tire tracker to find out which Hercules tire fits your vehicle the best. That's HerculesTires.com. Hercules Tires, ride on our strength.
Kurt Becker joins us for this week's edition of MRN Out Loud. He debuted at the Motor Racing Network back in 1994. He's from Altamont, Illinois, and if you've never heard of it, he'll be glad to tell you all about it. He is the track announcer at Keeneland Racecourse in Lexington, the former voice of Churchill Downs. He may have cured the heartbreak of psoriasis and is not likely the cause of that annoying rash. Kurt, welcome to the program, man. How are you?
Woody, it's good to see you again. Good to join you today.
So we've had a busy half a year so far, if you will, and this natural break while the Olympics are going on is an opportunity to kind of catch our breath. And I was hoping to do a little horse racing chat with you as well, because I think there are some interesting parallels there that racing fans on the motorsport side might not be aware of. But let's kick it off on the NASCAR side. Eric Almirola gets that victory, and the playoff seats are running out, it looks like.
Yeah, they really are. And when Eric went to victory lane, it actually got me to thinking about the storyline that the playoffs give us. I will admit that several years ago when NASCAR decided to go to a playoff format, I'm pretty big on tradition. I'm pretty big on history, and I was skeptical of the whole thing. Look, I'm old enough to remember.
At any point, did you say, get off my lawn?
pretty much. That's kind of the ballpark I'm often finding myself in.
Me too, brother.
And to that point, guys like you and me, Woody, are old enough to remember. Heck, I can recall days when we would start moving into summer. By the time summer would wrap up and we would get to Darlington on Labor Day weekend, a lot of times that championship battle was down to just two guys, and then it wasn't too long after that it might be down to one, and you go through the last 5 or 6 races of the year, and the championship was sewn up. So I have to admit that I think from our perspective as broadcasters, it certainly gives us something to discuss with the public and for the public to follow as well, because Almirola is a great example. About the time that one starts to discount a particular driver or particular team, all of a sudden, bam, here they come out of nowhere. And now there's a new face in the playoffs. So, and it does. And then the scramble is on. And then you've got the drivers who've got to think about, okay, I've got to start looking at points. And if I'm below that cut line, do I think I can get in on just points? Or am I going to have to get a win to get this thing wrapped up?
And it's interesting because it may change the way they're racing. Some of the guys who are further back, they're not concerned about these stage points at all. They know I got to win or I'm not going to make it. While a guy who's on the bubble, you look at Tyler Reddick and Austin Dillon, teammates, ironically enough, just 5 points separating them at the cut line. They may try and get stage points and accumulate those and not focus so much on the win because they know they're right at the edge.
It really does create a lot of strategy and a lot of races within the race, doesn't it? Because what you're touching on there, Woody, is, and this is what I like about it, is I think it impacts the way a driver looks at the race who's in that spot. It impacts the way the crew chief is going to look at certain aspects of strategy. When you pit, when you don't pit, do you stay out? Are the stage points important? Is track position more important than the stage points? And then I think it's a real test. NASCAR is a team sport. So often, to me, this is one of the things that's amazing about NASCAR is we tend to focus on the man or woman who's sitting in the driver's seat. but you've got the guys on pit road and you've got the crew chief. And then to me, this is the question. When you get into this time of year, do you have a crew chief and a driver who are compatible? That if one says to the other, look, given our circumstance, we're going to have to change up. We're going to have to go to plan B, C, or D. Will they both be able to get on board with that? Or will there be a come apart? Will there be a difference of opinion? And does that affect the morale? Does that affect the strategy? Does that impact adversely being able to reach that goal?
Yeah, I think that's so underrated in motorsports, is that chemistry and that teamwork notion. It's even more than the quarterback getting all the attention in football. You know, the driver gets all the attention, but man, all those other pieces have to fit together so intricately to make it work well. Before we leave the Cup Series, though, I wanted to get your opinion on a couple of the other huge news items that have broken. The dominoes in silly season seem to start falling earlier and earlier each year. Now we've got news that Brad Keselowski is going to be a part owner at Roush Fenway. We've got Trackhouse buying out Chip Ganassi Racing. We've got Austin Cindric headed to the 2 to replace Brad Keselowski. Harrison Burton going to the Wood Brothers to replace Matt DiBenedetto, who's a fan favorite, got voted into the All-Star race on the strength of the fan vote. Everything is swirling earlier and earlier. Kurt, what do you see in the bigger picture here?
I will say this from I think a lot of us probably when we were kids growing up, you know, you would dream about what it would be like to be a race car driver or to be a Cup driver. I will say from this standpoint, I don't envy today's Cup drivers from the aspect that, yeah, these things start a lot earlier. You used to the silly season. It seemed like you remember back in the days when we would wrap up, and I'm going way back here, but we would wrap up at Riverside on the West Coast, and then silly season would kind of start in as you literally went into the off season. Well, now here by mid-July, it starts to fire up. I will say this. I think that if I'm Matt DiBenedetto, let's start with him. If I am a race team and if I am a sponsor of a race team, this is somebody that I would love to have driving my race car because of the way he represents himself and represents the sport. He's good with the fans. He knows what to say, what not to say, and he's a good race car driver, which ultimately is what it takes. I just really have believed, like a lot of us have for a long time, this is a guy that despite some of the challenges he's had, he continues to deserve a vote of confidence, and I think he's going to find it. When you mentioned Brad Keselowski, I think that a few years ago, I was having a discussion with some of our colleagues at the Motor Racing Network about the future of the sport. And as just being realistic, when you started looking around the garage area, and so many Cup Series team owners, even by that point, were becoming advanced in years. And look, we all appreciate what they have done for the sport, number one, and we all hope those owners will be around a lot longer yet, number two. With that said, you've got to be realistic about planning for the future. And when so many Cup Series team owners, when so many are octogenarians and they're getting well into their 80s and such, I see the same thing when it comes to working in the horse business. We say that all the time there. Look, if you don't have somebody who's willing to own horses and pay the vet bills and pay the training bills and so on, you're not going to have the sport. So when I look up and I see a young person, and speaking as a guy who's 52, Brad Keselowski seems very young to me. I think it's fantastic to see more and more drivers who have that experience, who understand the sport from sitting in that seat behind the wheel saying, you know what, I'm going to make a commitment here and become involved as an owner in the sport. I think that bodes well for the future.
I agree. And then what Justin Marks is doing with Trackhouse, that's more moving in the direction anyway of an entertainment company. He wants to be based in Nashville ultimately. And, you know, the deal with Brad Keselowski, that glass ceiling, if you will, was broken when Denny Hamlin said, okay, I'm going to do that this year. With many of the ownership coming in, many of the new people, new faces, eyeing that next gen race car as a way to get in economically, because the old adage, and again, I'm dating us both here, when Felix Sabata says the best way to make a small fortune is to take a big fortune and get into racing.
Exactly. But you're right, Woody. It's been interesting to watch all the, you mentioned Trackhouse and using them as an example. You talked about the entertainment aspect combined with motorsports. I think that what's great when you look at what Justin Marks and his friends and partners are doing, I will admit, I am not a guy who thinks quote unquote outside the box. I will admit I am a conventional, linear, straight line. By golly, we've always done it this way, and that's how it ought to be done. That's why when I see a Justin Marks, when I see folks who come along and say, no, I don't think we have to keep doing it according to this business model. I think we can incorporate new aspects. Let's try something new. It makes me think of, you're a student of history, and I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and this is not to get political, I think we're going far enough back that we're not being real political with FDR, but FDR was famous for saying, well, let's try something, let's try it and see if it'll work. So I think that's great. Innovation is so important in any given sport, but I think especially in racing.
Yeah, it's sure going to be a lot of fun to watch what comes of the new car, the new ownership. A lot of shiny and new things will be under the tree at Christmas and then moving into the 2022 season as well. But you mentioned paying the bills in horse racing there, and that's where I wanted to segue with you right quickly. But first, let's take a time out and come back and talk about some ways that maybe the horse racing world is similar to the NASCAR world. And I need a schedule reset after everything that happened last year. You got to tell me what I should be looking for. So we'll do that right after this.
Sir, are you aware you were going 40 miles an hour? This is a residential area.
Sure, but I'm on my lawnmower? Wait, am I getting a ticket?
No, I've just never seen anyone top 9 miles an hour on one of those bad boys. And mow their entire lawn in 30 seconds? What got into you?
Well, it did fuel up at Sunoco this morning.
At Sunoco, we know how to fuel peak performance. We've been doing it for American racing for over 50 years. Fuel your best.
Back on MRN Out Loud with Kurt Becker, who is not only one of the Motor Racing Network announcers, but is a horse racing announcer as well. Now, Kurt, for folks who aren't as familiar with the horse racing world, everybody's heard of Churchill Downs, of course. It's like Daytona in NASCAR world, but I imagine that there are a lot of other places and other venues that are on that. I don't know what the proper term is. Not the Gold Key. What's the term? Help me out here, Kurt. The main events.
Sure.
There are so many of those that I think are equate to what we have in NASCAR with winning the 600, winning the Daytona 500. I mean, everybody knows about the Triple Crown in horse racing, but help me understand the broader picture in that world there and how it breaks down similarly to NASCAR.
Well, if you think about it, Woody, when we start out in NASCAR and we start our season right off the bat with the Daytona 500, and then you've got you mentioned the 600 miler at Charlotte, which of course comes off on Memorial
Crown
Weekend.
Jewels, that's the word I was looking for.
There.
Crown Jewels. I knew
we
it'd come
go.
back to me sooner or later. Okay, anyway, sorry.
Well, I think one of the most interesting parallels to me is thoroughbred racing has its championship weekend literally on the exact same weekend that NASCAR has championship weekend in November, and that's with the Breeders' Cup. So even after the Triple Crown wraps up in the springtime, the thoroughbred folks start moving on into the summer, and horses. What the way you qualify? Okay, we were. It's kind of similar with NASCAR. We were talking about how it's really important if you want to be rock solid sure that you got a spot in the playoffs, you need to win a race. It's that simple. With horse racing, it's similar because the Breeders' Cup are called the World Championships of horse racing. And there are what they will call Breeders' Cup win and you're in races, qualifying races all summer long leading up to that weekend in November. And this year, the Breeders' Cup is being held at Del Mar in Southern California in the San Diego area. So, for example, right now, the main focus of the horse racing scene in the summertime is at Saratoga up in upstate New York. And Del Mar is currently racing in Southern California. Those are two of the premier summertime meets in America. And those two tracks in particular, as we go through the summer, they will on weekends, just like NASCAR, you get to Saturday and Sunday, and here come the races that really count in that regard. They will have these win and you're in challenge races. And if your horse wins one of those races, the Breeders' Cup folks, they will actually call you up and say, guess what? You now have a guaranteed starting spot in the starting gate for the Breeders' Cup in November, and we're even going to pay your travel expenses to get there. So in that regard,
because a horse has to buy 2 plane tickets, right?
That's right. Well, believe it or not, horses do travel. They travel not only by ground, by shipping van, but in some cases, depending on the distance, if they're going from coast to coast, there are companies that have taken jumbo jets and airliners and have gutted out the fuselage and installed stalls, partitions, and horses will travel in some cases by air. So you get a little bit of everything that way. But it's all about, the emphasis is on getting a win and guaranteeing your spot in what is essentially the horse racing playoffs.
Okay, then two questions leap to mind from what you just said. One, is there some type of point system in which you have to run a certain number of races, similar to what you do on the motorsport side? And two, is the Breeders' Cup race sort of like Phoenix in that that's a winner take all thing, or is there, some type of point system that determines the champion?
That's a fantastic question, because there are some differences when we start reading the fine print, so to speak. With regard to points, really with the Breeders' Cup, if you get an overflow field and let's say you get more horses that are qualified to run, and the Breeders' Cup, by the way, is a 2-day event, and you've got all kinds of different races depending on the age of the horse, the distance the horse is going to run, the racing surface, because you've got a dirt surface for some horses, a grass or turf surface for others. So what happens is that the Breeders' Cup, they have the starting gate, the maximum width, the maximum number of starting spots for any of those races is 14. So if you end up and you've got a horse that you're hoping to get to the Breeders' Cup, let's say you did not win one of the challenge races, okay? You still have a shot to get in there based on how much money you have won in what are called graded stakes races. Essentially, graded stakes races are races that kind of quote unquote make the grade. There's a North American graded stakes committee, and based on recent history, based on purse structure, based on recent prestige and so on, horses that have typically run in those races, they will go back each year and look at these races and designate them grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. Grade 1 is the highest. So if you might not have won a Breeders' Cup challenge, you might not have even won a graded stakes race, but if you've accumulated enough money, if you've taken enough purse money out of those graded races, that's essentially your way of scoring points to say, I could still find my way into the starting gate for the Breeders' Cup. And if you ever had a case where you had more than 14 challenge race winners, and I don't think they have a situation, if memory serves, I think they limit the number of challenge races so horses can still get in on earnings. But even if you did, let's say for the sake of argument, if you had 16 challenge race winners for a 14 stall starting gate, it would still go down to, okay, then we go and start looking again at those graded purse earnings. Basically, who has won the most money among these horses?
For a tiebreaker, essentially. And then money in some fashion then becomes points. And I would imagine that the grade 1 races you mentioned would have a bigger purse than the 2s, 3s, and on down the line.
Exactly right. And then the other part of your question you had asked is, okay, so is it like NASCAR? Once we get our championship field set, is it a case where whoever goes out and finishes the best is your champion? And that is absolutely the case. For all intents and purposes, once those horses go in the gate, whether it's a Breeders' Cup 2-year-old race, whether it's a race on the dirt or the turf, whatever division it might be, who in this particular case, yes, it's going to be whoever gets to that finish line first. Whoever's nose hits that finish line first, that's going to be your race winner. And for all intents and purposes, that will generally end up being the horse that is considered the champion for that division. It does get a little tricky because there is still a vote that takes place involving journalists, writers, and broadcasters who cover the sport.
Similar to what we used to have in college football before the playoff system.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's got its pros and cons. I think one of the good things about it is it generates some debate and discussion leading up to the official awards dinner in January each year. And there's no system that's perfect. And you and I both know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit further backwards in the process, jockeys and horses who are just starting out, I imagine that there are tons of local tracks. You mentioned doing some work at county fair horse races. I didn't realize that it got down to that level, but so I'm imagining that some will start off in that level and go right on up the line, and others, say for example, who have a great DNA lineage, might start a little higher on the totem pole and not have to, troll around in the smaller events so much.
You do see this. I think if you look at the horses themselves, it does seem like that over the years, at least in thoroughbred racing, the overwhelming majority of the horses that you see at the top level of the game, they typically have your royal blue-blooded pedigrees. It just seems like that as a general rule, if you want a horse that's going to be competitive in a Kentucky Derby or a Breeders' Cup race, you're going to generally need a horse that shows in its bloodlines it comes from that kind of heritage. Not all the time, but most of the time. As far as the human beings who participate, I think with horse trainers and jockeys, there is a lot of similarity to what we see in motorsports, because I'll give you an example. In my hometown, I live in central Illinois in a little farming community of 2,400 people. We've got a county fair where we've got horse racing each year. There's no parimutuel betting. Mom and pop and the kids come out and sit in the stands, and friends like to bet dollars or quarters or dimes against each other. And, you pick your horse, I'll pick mine. It's just a very laid back, fun type of atmosphere. But you will see jockeys. And I think of a jockey named Ramsey Zimmerman, came to our fair, young guy trying to get established in the game. He was from Chicago, couldn't get established at the Chicago Parimutuels, came downstate, found a trainer that gave him an opportunity to ride on the fair circuit. I mean, we're talking going for, $1,000 a race at most. He ends up being the champion jockey on the fair circuit. I think that was back around 2006, about 15 years ago. Following year, he ends up going to the Parimutuels, goes to Canada to Woodbine Racecourse, and wins a $2 million race. So, look, granted, that's not going to happen in every case. And in fact, his story admittedly is probably the exception, not the rule, but it does make the point that yes, there are folks who can start out just like we see in motorsports. It is possible to start at that grassroots level and work your way up. Woody, I have to speak. Here's something I've got to mention on that.
Okay.
We all remember in motorsports and in NASCAR, the late Mike Mittler. Mm-hmm. Mike, of course, owned a NASCAR Camping World Truck Series team for many, many years, and was based in the St. Louis area. And Mike, rest his soul, he's no longer with us. But you know what Mike Mittler did for a lot of folks in NASCAR? I can remember years ago, he had a young man that wanted to be a race car driver. And Mike sat him down one day and he said, I'm going to be blunt. For a number of reasons, I don't think that it's going to work. I hate to tell you, but if you want an honest assessment, I don't see your future leading you to a path as a cup driver. But he said, I tell you what I will do. He said, you have incredible ability when it comes to working on a chassis. He said, I've seen it. He said, I'm going to pick up the phone if you want. And he said, I will call a cup team. And I think that I can bring you to their attention. And if you want to work at the shop, maybe even find a spot on the race day crew, I think you have a future in that aspect. And that young man did. And he went on and worked his way up the ladder and ended up having a productive career as a fabricator and a chassis man with a Cup Series team. And when I think about, you talked about owners earlier and the importance of team owners in NASCAR. And I think of Mike Mittler and I think of his role in the Truck Series and how he would take young, aspiring race car drivers and other folks wanting that career in NASCAR. He knew how to shape and mold them and set them on the right path to where they needed to go. Heck, we all need that kind of guidance from time to time.
Absolutely. So continuing the theme here, obviously a jockey equates to a driver on the motorsport side. Does a trainer equate to a crew chief, or is it not that precise? And I see where a lot of trainers, for example, every time you see Bob Baffert's name mentioned, it's like he trains, these 27 horses or whatever. And then on the ownership side, is it similar in that multiple top race horses are owned by an individual, or is that not as likely as we see in motorsports?
You do see this, particularly again at the top level. When you look at those crown jewel type races, you will see a lot of the same names popping up from year to year, both as trainers and also as owners. I know that if you go way back, and you go back to what I would call maybe the golden era of horse racing back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, you had these farms like the legendary Calumet Farm, and they would breed and raise their own stock, and they would dominate races like the Kentucky Derby, and the power of the sport was concentrated in just a few hands. Well, the way that horse racing has changed, you don't really see those types of old school mainline farms anymore. And while I hate the fact that that part of the sport is no longer what it once was, what you do see instead, you see a lot of private capital getting involved. And you see in some cases, what we've seen in recent years, there are some folks that are finally figuring this out. Okay, if I go to the horse sale and if I can't compete with the guy that has a bottomless pit full of money and can just write a check for any amount he wants, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to Woody Cain, and I'm going to talk to my other colleagues at the network, and I'm going to sit down and say, what if we, instead of bidding against each other, what if we all pooled our resources? We each throw X amount of dollars into the pot. Maybe we can then bid on one of these horses that has a little better bloodlines, a little better confirmation. And that to me has made it competitive. What do you mentioned Bob Baffert. And of course, Bob trained 2 Triple Crown winners, American Pharoah and Justify. Until that happened, we had gone 37 years, I think it was, without a Triple Crown winner. I maintain one of the reasons it's tougher today to win a Triple Crown than it was back in the golden era. Look, back then you had maybe 70 or 80 horses total nominated to those Triple Crown races. Today, with all of these people going to horse sales and firing money at horses and hoping to win those races, today you're going to see literally more like 300 or 400 horses nominated to the Triple Crown. I think it's a numbers game. It's law of averages. You've got a much deeper, larger talent pool. It's going to be tougher to win those kind of races.
Absolutely, and everything seems to be moving in that direction. But you mentioned the summer stretch. What kinds of things are happening right now that folks want to pay special attention to? And you mentioned something that intrigued me there. You said nominated to these Triple Crown races. So they're unlike the Breeders' Cup in terms of how you get in?
It is slightly different, although in each case, there are fees that must be paid up front when these horses are quite young, when they're babies, when they're 1 year old. Sometimes it's not till they're 2 or 3 years old, but it's almost like you have to throw down some money right off the bat and say, okay, I've got some skin in the game. I'm going to nominate this horse for the Triple Crown Series or the Breeders' Cup. That can be scary because usually those nominations are required before you might not even be sure how good this horse is going to be. But it's almost like the racing world says, all right, you want in on this deal, you're going to have to throw some money in here and show that you're serious. With the Triple Crown Series, and of course, we've wrapped that up for the year for this year, but the Triple Crown Series, straight up, at least with the Kentucky Derby, very similar to what we see when we start talking about the playoffs with NASCAR, and we're talking about the cut line and how many points a driver has, and will it be enough? Will there be enough cushion to make it into the playoffs? Similar situation with the Kentucky Derby each year on that first Saturday in May, Woody, because what the horse racing world does, there will be tracks all over America that will have essentially qualifying races that serve as prep races for the Derby, and those races will pay points. So trainers will sit down with owners and they will map out a strategy. I think we should go here, here, and here. And I think we can amass enough points to get into that starting gate. And boy, when you get down, the last major points paying races for the Derby are about 2 to 3 weeks before the race. There are folks sweating bullets. And a lot of times those final prep races, you will see big, bulky, full starting gates with an overflow field because everybody starts throwing something at the wall, seeing if it will stick, saying, man, this is my last shot. It's a dream to run in the Derby. I'm going to throw my horse in this last prep race, hope he finishes first or second, and gets enough points to go on to Churchill Downs.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of the old Winston Racing series, the local weekly short tracks where an ace at one track might go around to some of the other tracks if there's a guy close to him and try to beat him or try and gain more points than him or race a little bit more because you can drop some and that type of thing. That does really equate.
That's an excellent comparison. And I think the other thing that to me I find interesting about being involved with both sports, again, you see parallels. You asked about, is it fair to say that a crew chief is similar to a racehorse trainer? I think absolutely. There's a trainer in thoroughbred racing by the name of Brad Cox. He had the Belmont Stakes winner, won the final leg of the Triple Crown this year. Brad's out of Louisville, Kentucky. And I think what Brad does really well, and you and I have seen it in NASCAR from crew chiefs, when the wheels start to come off the operation and things don't go like you had planned, a good crew chief knows how to gather that team around and get everybody to calm down and right the ship and get everything back on even keel. Brad's got that ability with racehorses. I don't know how he does it, but he's got the ability somehow. If a horse hits a losing streak and hits a losing streak at a bad time of year, he knows how to take that horse and put him through the training paces each morning and get that horse, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, get them refocused in time to literally and figuratively get back on track and win races like the Belmont Stakes. And I think absolutely there's a parallel between trainer and crew chief.
Well, it's all fascinating. I had this idea kicking around in my head for a while that there were a lot of parallels, and you've helped illustrate that there really, in fact, are. But let's wrap up with this, Kurt. What's on your upcoming calendar, both on the NASCAR side and in the horse racing side?
Well, coming up, I've got one of the things that I enjoy very much is the fact that I get to go to the Worldwide Technology Raceway in what conventionally has been known as Gateway over the years, in Madison, Illinois, located down near St. Louis, Missouri. I live in central Illinois along I-70. So when we go to Gateway for the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series or the ARCA Menard Series, I get to jump in the car. And I'm driving maybe an hour and a half from my front door. And I always see folks from my hometown and the surrounding area who will buy tickets and go to the races there. So that's kind of like old home week. That's a lot of fun for me. And this year, the truck race at Gateway serves as the first race in the playoffs. So that's going to add an extra dimension there. And then other than that, between now and then, here over the next 3 weeks or so, pretty close to home and just pretty well calling county fair horse races and just continuing to enjoy as much as the summer as I can. I will say this before you go, Woody, I got to share this with you.
Okay.
Our friend and colleague at Motor Racing Network, Hall of Famer Rusty Wallace, I remember one time he turned to me and he said, "So you work in horse racing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "There's one thing I can't understand about that sport." I said, "What's that?" He said, "You guys only go one lap."
That sounds exactly like Rusty. But but there is something too, kind of conserving. It's not like similar to a car can run wide open the whole distance of the race because they'll metaphorically run out of gas.
Well, and that's true. And you've got to be careful. Some of the best jockeys are the ones that know, especially in a longer distance race, how to rate that horse, conserve that energy, as you say, have enough left for the stretch drive. I'll tell you something else that I like, Woody, is I've seen so much mutual respect across the aisle between horse racing and motorsports. In the horse racing world, I have had folks say to me, that they cannot imagine crawling into a race car and being out on a racetrack with 39 other drivers and machines, and especially when they look at Daytona and Talladega and the speeds that cars can attain. And by the same token, I know that I've had folks in NASCAR who have told me when they look at a horse and jockey going onto the racetrack, I've had drivers tell me that they're fascinated by the fact that jockeys, don't have a roll cage and don't have a Hans device. So I've always admired the fact that you see competitors in both sports who have a mutual respect for what one another does.
Absolutely. That makes it fun when you can go to different worlds and experience them. And that's why I wanted to do this particular program when we didn't have racing going on so we could talk a little bit about it. Kurt, it's been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to catching up with you at Gateway.
Woody, that sounds great. Thanks for having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
You bet. I enjoyed it as well. We'll be right back.
Citywide to countryside, whatever you drive, wherever you go, Hercules has the value, selection, and industry-leading warranty to get you there no matter where the road takes you. Go to HerculesTires.com. There you can find the nearest authorized Hercules retail location to you. Plus, you can use the tire tracker to find out which Hercules tire fits your vehicle the best. That's HerculesTires.com. Hercules Tires, ride on our strength.
That's all the time we've got on this week's edition of MRN Out Loud. We want to thank Kurt Becker for joining us and giving us a little education on the horse racing world now as we take this break for the Olympics in the NASCAR world, at least racing on the national level. Don't forget, you can keep up with everything going on in the sport at MRN.com. Also on NASCAR Live every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. You can find the latest show at MRN.com as well, or with me on NASCAR Today every weekday all across the country. If your local station's not carrying it, call them and ask them why. Until we see you right back here next week, I'm Woody Cain saying thanks for joining us.